On a summer morning in June 2024, inside a modest home in Lakewood, New Jersey, a scene of unspeakable horror unfolded. 27-year-old Naomi Elkins, a daycare worker and young mother of two, would commit an act that left even seasoned detectives shaken. She drowned both of her daughters, one just a toddler, the other a preschooler, in what she later described as a religious cleansing. In the weeks leading up to the tragedy, family members and neighbors recalled signs that Naomi was unraveling. After giving birth, she had battled postpartum depression that slid into something darker. Episodes of paranoia, fixations on scripture, and grand declarations about being chosen for a higher purpose. According to a clinical psychologist who later evaluated her, Naomi had entered a state of psychosis shaped by religious delusion. In her own mind, she wasn't harming her daughters. She believed she was saving them, purging evil, and ensuring their place in eternity. The final hours were chilling in their detail. Investigators reported that after submerging her girls in water, one of them showing evidence of a stab wound as well, Naomi herself called for help. When police arrived, she was frantic but firm in her belief. "I had to do it," she reportedly told them. "God wanted me to. They were not safe." To her, it was not murder, but obedience. The case moved quickly through the courts, but its outcome was anything but simple. Prosecutors charged Naomi with 2 counts of first-degree murder and related weapons offenses. The community was outraged. How could a mother trusted to care for children both at home and at a daycare center commit such an atrocity? But as the months passed, experts examined her mental state. Psychiatrists testified unanimously Naomi was in the grip of a deific decree delusion, the fixed false belief that God had commanded her actions. She could not distinguish right from wrong. In April 2025, a New Jersey judge delivered the verdict: not guilty by reason of insanity. Instead of a prison sentence, Naomi was committed to a secure psychiatric hospital, with the length of her confinement described as 2 lifetime terms. Doctors will monitor her indefinitely, and judges will review her case periodically, but few believe she will ever walk free. For the public, the decision stirred unease. To some, it felt like a loophole, as though justice had slipped away. To others, it was a recognition of harsh truth, that Naomi was not a criminal in the traditional sense, but a mother consumed by a psychotic faith that rewired her reality. In either case, the outcome does nothing to erase the loss of 2 innocent children whose lives ended before they even began. The story of Naomi Elkins is haunting not only for its brutality, but for its familiarity. It echoed past cases, mothers like Andrea Yates and Deanna Laney, proving that these tragedies are not confined to history books. They recur again and again when untreated mental illness merges with faith in the most destructive way. And just like in those earlier cases, a family and a community are left asking how devotion, motherhood, and murder could ever intertwine. The tragedy of Naomi Elkins showed how quickly untreated postpartum psychosis, wrapped in religious delusion, can transform love into lethal obedience. 2 little girls gone in the name of cleansing evil. The court declared her insane, but that verdict doesn't erase the horror. It leaves us with a haunting truth. Sometimes the most sacred bond, that of mother and child, can become the stage for unimaginable violence when faith turns fatal. But Naomi's story is not alone. Just months later, in the quiet fields of Ohio, another mother, this time from one of America's most traditional religious communities, would commit a nearly identical act. In a place where violence is rare and faith is woven into every part of life, an Amish mother named Ruth Miller claimed she was obeying God's will when she drowned her 4-year-old son. Deep in the heart of Holmes County, Ohio, where horse-drawn buggies share the roads with quiet farmhouses, the Amish are known for their devotion, their separation from modern life, and their deep commitment to faith and family. To outsiders, it is often imagined as a safe world, one of order, reverence, and protection from the chaos of modern society. But in August 2025, that image was shattered when police were called to a scene so shocking it defied comprehension. The woman at the center of it all was Ruth Miller, a 40-year-old Amish mother. On the afternoon of the tragedy, witnesses say she appeared disturbed, pacing and speaking in half-scriptural fragments. When officers arrived, what they discovered was every parent's nightmare. Her 4-year-old son, Vincent, drowned. Prosecutors allege that Ruth deliberately held him underwater, later telling police she had given him to God. But the horror didn't stop there. According to investigators, after drowning her son, Ruth attempted to drive her other children into danger, at one point trying to steer them into a lake, at another urging them toward a golf cart in motion. Her behavior was erratic, yet laced with religious conviction. She told officers she needed to be swallowed by a fish, like Jonah from the Bible, to prove her faith. This bizarre detail, straight from scripture but warped into a delusional mission, has become a chilling marker of the case. As body cam footage later released showed Ruth's demeanor when confronted by police. She was calm, almost eerily composed. One officer asked her directly, "Why did you do this?" Ruth's response was simple and haunting. "Because God told me to. He wanted him back." The officer pressed, asking if she regretted it. Ruth reportedly shook her head and whispered, "No, I gave him to the Lord." This was not the language of panic or confusion. It was the language of conviction, a conviction prosecutors now say crossed the line from faith into fatal delusion. The legal response was swift. Ruth Miller was charged with aggravated murder, domestic violence, and multiple counts of child endangerment. In court, she appeared in plain Amish dress, head covered, her face expressionless. Her attorneys quickly entered a plea of not guilty by reason of insanity, signaling a defense strategy centered on her state of mind rather than denying what happened. Forensic psychiatrists are now tasked with determining whether Ruth was capable of understanding right from wrong at the time of the crime. Early assessments point toward a condition known as deific decree delusion, where individuals believe they are receiving direct commands from God. In this distorted mental state, the ordinary moral compass is overridden by what feels like divine instruction. Experts note that it is one of the most dangerous intersections of faith and mental illness, because the person no longer sees their actions as choices, but as sacred duties. Within the Amish community, grief is compounded by disbelief. Neighbors described Ruth as quiet, hardworking, devoted to her children. One community elder told reporters, "We cannot understand this. Family is everything. To think of a mother doing this, it shakes us to the core." Vigils were held in silence, with candles flickering against the dark, but no easy answers could be found. Nationally, the case has drawn attention because of how unexpected it seems. The Amish are often portrayed as a people insulated from the pressures of modern life, but this tragedy is a reminder that mental illness, delusion, and violence can cut through even the most sheltered of worlds. It forces difficult questions. Did Ruth suffer silently without access to mental health care? Could intervention have prevented this? Or was she already too far lost in her convictions? As the legal proceedings continue, Ruth sits in custody, awaiting psychiatric evaluation and trial. If doctors confirm her insanity plea, she will likely spend the rest of her life in a secure hospital rather than a prison cell. For prosecutors, however, the focus remains on accountability. A child's life was taken, siblings placed in danger, and an entire community left scarred. The case of Ruth Miller is more than just another tragic headline. It is a story that confronts us with the darkest possibilities of faith when warped by illness. It shows us how devotion can be twisted into justification for violence, and it reminds us painfully that no community, no matter how peaceful or devout, is immune from tragedy when mental illness and unchecked delusion collide. Holmes County will never forget August 2025. A child was lost, a family shattered, and a community forced to ask how faith, meant to be a light, could cast such a terrible shadow. The case of Ruth Miller shook the Amish community to its core. A people known for simplicity, peace, and faith were forced to confront the unimaginable. A mother drowning her son and calling it God's will. The shock wasn't just in the act, but in the setting. A community where violence is rare, where tradition shields families from the chaos of the outside world. Ruth's crime proved that delusion and tragedy can strike anywhere, even in places thought to be untouched by such darkness. But this horror was not without precedent. Nearly 2 decades earlier, in a small town in East Texas, another mother walked down the very same path. It was Mother's Day weekend when Deanna Laney claimed God had spoken to her, and what she did next would forever scar her family, her church, and her community. It was Mother's Day weekend, May 2003, in New Chapel Hill, a small rural community outside Tyler, Texas. At church, Deanna Laney was known as a gentle homemaker, a devoted wife, a mother who homeschooled her boys and sang in the choir. Friends described her as soft-spoken, deeply religious, and always surrounded by her 3 sons. But behind that familiar image was a mind unraveling, a woman slipping further and further into a dangerous mix of paranoia, apocalyptic fear, and religious obsession. In the weeks before the tragedy, those close to Deanna recalled troubling signs. She spoke of visions of preparing her house for the end times. She talked about needing to get her house in order because God was preparing to act. Experts later called it a textbook case of deific decree delusion, a psychotic state in which someone believes God has issued them personal commands. For Deanna, those commands would soon focus on the people she loved most. In the early hours of May 11th, 2003, while her husband slept, Deanna led her 3 sons, Joshua, 8, Luke, 6, and Aaron, 14 months, outside the house. What happened next is as horrifying as it is heartbreaking. She struck Joshua and Luke with large rocks, killing them instantly. She then turned to Aaron, her youngest. She attacked him too, but Aaron miraculously survived, though gravely injured. When investigators later asked her why, she answered with a chilling certainty. God had told her to do it. She believed he wanted her to prove her faith by sacrificing her children, much like Abraham in the Old Testament. After the killings, Deanna called 911 herself. On the recording, she is calm, almost matter-of-fact, describing what she has done. When officers arrived, they found her barefoot in the grass, covered in blood, pointing them toward the bodies of her children. She showed no panic, no attempt to flee, only the conviction that she had obeyed God's will. The case shocked East Texas and made national headlines. How could a mother so deeply involved in her church, so committed to her children, commit such a crime? The answer, according to both prosecutors and defense attorneys, lay not in cruelty, but in psychosis. 5 mental health experts evaluated Deanna, 2 for the state, 2 for the defense, and 1 appointed by the court. All 5 agreed. She was suffering from severe psychotic delusions at the time of the killings, and she could not distinguish right from wrong. At trial in April of 2004, the jury heard harrowing testimony about her state of mind. Prosecutors argued the horror of the crime should not be excused, but even they did not dispute the unanimous medical findings. After hours of deliberation, the jury returned a verdict. Not guilty by reason of insanity. Deanna was committed to Kerrville State Hospital, a psychiatric institution where she would remain under constant supervision. For years, judges reviewed her case. weighing the testimony of doctors against public safety. In 2012, nearly a decade later, she was conditionally released under strict requirements: medication, therapy, monitoring, and a ban on contact with children. To this day, her freedom exists only under those conditions. Her life forever shaped by what happened that Mother's Day weekend. The case of Deanna Laney is perhaps one of the clearest examples of how religious delusion can twist faith into violence. To her, it was not murder, it was obedience. To the rest of the world, it was a betrayal of the sacred bond between mother and child carried out in the name of God, and it remains a haunting reminder of what can happen when mental illness goes untreated and belief becomes a weapon against one's own family. The story of Deanna Laney became one of the most infamous examples of what psychiatrists call a deific decree delusion, the belief that God personally commands a person to kill. On Mother's Day, she carried out what she thought was a holy sacrifice, murdering 2 of her sons and nearly killing the 3rd. A jury later found her insane, but the verdict could not erase the brutal truth. Faith, when twisted by psychosis, can turn a mother's hands into instruments of death. Her case became a haunting reminder that religious delusion is not confined to fringe sects or isolated families. It can take root in everyday homes and churches. But for some women, it isn't just their own children who fall victim. Sometimes belief warped by cult control spreads outward, reshaping entire lives. In Georgia, a young mother immersed in a polygamous cult lifestyle took her faith and paranoia to the ultimate extreme, stabbing her infant daughter in the name of deliverance. Her name was Chloe Driver, December 19th, 2020. In a quiet neighborhood of Cobb County, Georgia, the unthinkable happened inside a modest apartment. When first responders entered the home of 23-year-old Chloe Alexis Driver, they found her 13-month-old daughter, Hannah Nicole, covered in stab wounds. The baby had been attacked with a kitchen knife. She died before doctors could save her. The mother, young, soft-spoken, with no prior violent record, admitted what she had done. She had killed her own child. At first, police assumed postpartum breakdown or untreated psychosis, a tragedy they had seen before. But as investigators dug deeper, they uncovered something darker. Chloe's life was entangled with what prosecutors later described as a polygamist cult lifestyle. She was surrounded by teachings of submission, spiritual warfare, and the idea that evil forces could inhabit even the purest souls. In her fragile mind, those warnings became terrifyingly real. She began to believe that her baby daughter was touched by evil, a vessel of darkness. For Chloe, this was not murder. It was purification. Neighbors recalled seeing a young mother who often seemed withdrawn, overwhelmed, and isolated. Family members later testified that Chloe had been increasingly unstable in the months leading up to the crime, hearing voices, talking about demons, and showing signs of paranoia. Yet no one imagined she would turn that fear onto her own child. When detectives questioned her, Chloe calmly admitted she stabbed Hannah because she thought she was saving her from evil. Her words sent a chill through the courtroom months later when jurors heard them played aloud. The trial revealed the full weight of the horror. Prosecutors described the crime scene in vivid, devastating detail: a baby girl whose life had barely begun, murdered by the hands that once cradled her. They argued that Chloe's cult ties and religious obsessions amplified her delusions, feeding into her paranoia until it broke her completely. The defense countered that Chloe had long struggled with mental illness and that the killing was not calculated, but born from psychosis. Experts testified that she suffered from severe mental instability, possibly schizophrenia, worsened by cult influence and untreated paranoia. Jurors listened to both sides for weeks, torn between sympathy for a mentally ill young woman and horror at the brutality of her actions. In 2024, after 4 long years of legal proceedings, The verdict came guilty of malice, murder, and cruelty to children, but guilty with mental illness. Chloe Driver was sentenced to life in prison with mandatory psychiatric treatment for as long as she remains incarcerated. For many, it was a sentence that recognized her illness, but also her undeniable responsibility. The case left Cobb County shaken. How could a mother so young, so seemingly ordinary, commit such savagery against her own baby? The answer lay at the intersection of fragile psychology and dangerous belief systems. Prosecutors argued she was not only sick, but indoctrinated. Cult teachings that framed the world as a battlefield between good and evil had twisted Chloe's fears into lethal conviction. The jury's verdict ensured she would never harm another child, but it couldn't restore the life of baby Hannah. For true crime experts and psychologists alike, the case of Chloe Driver stands as a stark warning. Faith, when bent into fanaticism and reinforced by isolation, can amplify the darkest corners of the human mind. A young woman, barely out of her teens, convinced herself that she was fighting a spiritual battle, when in reality she was destroying the very life she had created. A child died not because of drugs, greed, or rage, but because of a mother's belief that killing was holy duty. And that is what makes Chloe Driver's story unforgettable. It is not just about a child murdered in silence. It is about a dangerous fusion of mental illness and faith gone wrong. A reminder that cult devotion can turn homes into crime scenes and mothers into killers. The story of Chloe Alexis Driver is one of the most haunting reminders of how cult devotion and mental illness can fuse into something deadly. A baby's life ended not in anger, but in a ritual of fear, framed as deliverance. For Chloe, it was a battle against demons. For the rest of the world, it was murder, plain and brutal. Her case forces us to face a terrible truth. When faith is twisted into fanaticism, even the most sacred bond between mother and child can be shattered beyond recognition. But Chloe's story was not the end. In fact, it was only the beginning of something much larger, a terrifying escalation from private tragedy to public terror. Because if one mother, convinced by cult voices, could turn her own home into a crime scene, what happens when a woman radicalized by ideology takes those beliefs into a crowded holiday party? In 2015, California would get that answer. Her name was Tashfeen Malik, and her act of faith would leave 14 people dead. December 2nd, 2015. The Inland Regional Center in San Bernardino, California, was hosting a holiday luncheon for county health employees. What began as a cheerful gathering with decorations, food, and co-workers sharing laughter would, within minutes, transform into one of the deadliest mass shootings in modern U.S. history. And at the center of it all was a woman whose name few had ever heard before that day, Tashfeen Malik. Tashfeen was born in Pakistan in 1986, but much of her childhood was spent in Saudi Arabia. Family described her as quiet, religious, and deeply studious. In her early 20s, she studied pharmacy at Bahauddin Zakaria University in Multan. During those years, friends noticed a change. Her dress became more conservative, her worldview stricter, her devotion more intense. Online, she began frequenting forums and private groups where extremist ideology was shared, messages that glorified violence as sacrifice and martyrdom as the ultimate proof of faith. Through the internet, Tashfeen met Syed Rizwan Farouk, an American-born county health inspector from California. The two married in 2014, and Tashfeen soon arrived in the United States on a fiancé visa. To neighbors, they seemed like an ordinary couple with a new baby daughter. They lived quietly in a Redlands apartment, attended mosque occasionally, and raised little suspicion. But beneath that calm surface, both were becoming radicalized. Investigators would later uncover years of private messages between them, dating back to before their marriage, pledging themselves to jihad and discussing their duty to God in violent terms. On that December morning, Rizwan attended the holiday party like everyone else. He posed for pictures, chatted with co-workers, and then abruptly left. Within the hour, he returned with Tashfeen, both of them armed with semi-automatic rifles, pistols, and hundreds of rounds of ammunition. They opened fire on the gathering of unarmed colleagues. In minutes, 14 people were dead, and 21 others were wounded. The couple left behind a pipe bomb designed to detonate and cause even more carnage, but it failed to explode. As police swarmed the area, the attackers fled in a black SUV. A massive manhunt swept through San Bernardino. Just hours later, officers cornered the couple on a suburban street. A fierce gun battle erupted. By the time it was over, both Rizwan Farouk and Tashfeen Malik lay dead in the vehicle. Their infant daughter, just 6 months old, was left behind in the care of relatives. Her parents gone forever, their legacy one of violence and infamy. The investigation that followed revealed chilling details. Inside their home, authorities found stockpiles of ammunition, bomb-making materials, and evidence of careful planning. But perhaps most disturbing was Tashfeen's final act of devotion. During the attack, she posted an online pledge of allegiance to the Islamic State and its leader, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. For her, this was not just violence. It was a declaration of faith, twisted into a weapon. Officials concluded that the couple were not directed by ISIS or any foreign group. Instead, they were what counterterrorism experts call homegrown violent extremists, radicalized online, inspired by propaganda, and determined to carry out mass murder in the name of their beliefs. Tashfeen's role shattered stereotypes. She was not a passive wife dragged into violence. Investigators found that she was an equal partner in planning, preparation, and execution. Her devotion was not quiet submission. It was active participation in terror. The San Bernardino attack left deep scars on the victims' families, on the community, and on the country. It reignited debates about immigration vetting, online radicalization, and the hidden pathways by which ordinary lives can transform into ideological extremism. For many, it was proof that faith, when corrupted by fanaticism, could devastate not just families, but entire communities in a matter of minutes. Tashfeen Malik entered America as a new bride, a mother, a woman seemingly searching for belonging, but she left it as the face of one of its darkest days, a reminder that when faith turns into fanaticism, it can spread destruction far beyond the home into the very heart of society. The story of Tashfeen Malik shows how faith, when radicalized, can move beyond the home and devastate an entire community. 14 lives lost, dozens wounded, all in the name of a twisted ideology. It was faith turned into terror on a massive scale. But not every act of religious delusion plays out on such a public stage. Sometimes it returns us to the most intimate and unthinkable setting of all, a mother alone with her child. Just 3 years ago, in Texas, another woman claimed she was following God's will. Only this time, the victim was her 5-year-old daughter, and the crime was carried out with chilling calm in the woods outside Magnolia. Her name was Melissa Towne, and her story closes this series with one of the most disturbing reminders of what happens when faith and madness collide. October 16th, 2022. It was a quiet Sunday in Magnolia, Texas, when 40-year-old Melissa Towne drove her 5-year-old daughter, Chanel, into the woods. Neighbors had seen them together before, a mother and child like any other. But what unfolded in those woods would leave investigators struggling to put words to their reports. There under the trees, Melissa pulled a plastic bag from her belongings, placed it over her daughter's head, and suffocated her. When Chanel fought for breath, Melissa pressed harder. Then she took a knife and slashed her throat. Within minutes, the little girl was gone. What Melissa did next stunned even seasoned law enforcement. She carried her daughter's body back to the car, buckled her into the passenger seat, and drove to a nearby hospital. Walking calmly into the emergency entrance, she told staff that her child was dead and that she had killed her. Doctors and nurses rushed outside, but it was too late. Chanel's life had ended before help ever arrived. When police questioned Melissa, her answers were chilling. She described her daughter as evil, insisting that killing her was the only way to save her soul. She told detectives that God wanted the child back, that she had done what was necessary. It was not rage, it was not impulse. It was, in her mind, divine instruction. Those words, "she was evil," would echo through the courtroom months later, evidence of a woman trapped in a world of delusion. Melissa's past painted a picture of warning signs ignored. She had been diagnosed with schizophrenia and had previously been institutionalized. Records revealed a long history of psychiatric struggles and an unstable home life. Social services had been involved with the family before, documenting concerns of neglect. But when the system looked away, Melissa's illness deepened. Off her medication, consumed by paranoia and religious obsession, she convinced herself that her child was possessed beyond redemption. What should have been a routine Sunday became a ritual of death. For the people of Magnolia and beyond, the crime was almost unbearable to comprehend. 5-year-old Chanel wasn't just a victim. She was a child whose innocence was weaponized by her own mother's delusions. Her name became synonymous with a question few dare to ask. How do we prevent faith, when filtered through illness, from becoming a tool of destruction? The legal system was left with an impossible task: to decide whether Melissa was a murderer or a woman so gripped by psychosis that she could not tell right from wrong. Psychiatrists testified that she was deeply schizophrenic, her mind fractured, her thoughts controlled by voices and delusions of divine instruction. The jury listened to her statements, her confessions, her flat insistence that her daughter was evil, and in July 2024, they rendered their verdict: not guilty by reason of insanity. Instead of prison, Melissa was ordered to spend the rest of her life confined to Vernon State Hospital, a secure psychiatric facility. There, under strict supervision, she will receive treatment, but she may never leave. Judges will review her case periodically, but unless doctors declare her safe, she will remain behind hospital walls until her death. The story of Melissa Towne brings us full circle, back to the image of a mother and child, back to the silence of a private moment twisted into horror. In the woods of Magnolia, Texas, she convinced herself that suffocating and stabbing her 5-year-old daughter was an act of holy justice. To her, it was obedience. To the rest of us, it was a reminder that when faith collides with delusion, the most innocent lives are often the first to be lost. Across these 6 cases, one thread ties everything together. Naomi Elkins and Ruth Miller, drowning their children under the weight of divine command. Deanna Laney, convinced on Mother's Day that God required a sacrifice. Chloe Driver, consumed by cult teachings until she turned on her baby. Tashfeen Malik, radicalized into unleashing terror on an entire community. And Melissa Towne, alone in the woods, killing in the name of purity. 6 women, 6 killers, each showing us how devotion, when poisoned by delusion or extremism, can transform love, faith, and duty into violence, death, and destruction. These are not just stories of crime. They are warnings about the fragility of the human mind and the danger of belief without balance. Faith can inspire hope, healing, and love, but faith twisted by paranoia, ideology, or illness can become the most dangerous weapon of all. If you've watched this far, I want to thank you. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please do so now. Your support keeps these stories alive and ensures we can keep shining light on the darkest corners of human behavior. Like this video if it opened your eyes, and share your thoughts in the comments. Which of these 6 cases shocked you the most? This has been When Faith Turns Fatal, 6 Women Who Became Killers. True crime stories. Until next time, stay aware, stay safe, and remember, not all faith leads to light.